I'm excited to be talking to you guys today about Women's Health is Community Health for Women's Health Month. My name, again, is Kate Barnes. My background is in anthropology and in public health. And I want to talk to you a little bit today about how I combine those fields in the interest of women's health. So let's go ahead and jump in. So the overarching question that I try to answer in a lot of my work is, how does the environment affect health? And the environment here can be both physical or social. It can be, our air, our soil. It can be, what we call our built environment. The houses and schools and buildings. Are there playgrounds for kids nearby? But it can also be social. It can be how people pattern themselves around a particular phenomenon. A lot of my work has looked at substance abuse. So in that context, I look at how people pattern themselves around substance abuse recovery. I'm going to be talking about a couple of those examples today. So these two studies both involve women. One involves the physical environment, and I think it really shows how research with women can contribute to everyone's health. The other study that I'm going to show is on the social environment, and it's how, again, people pattern themselves around a particular phenomenon, in this case, substance abuse recovery. Sorry, that's my cat Beast. This study looks at some of the ways that things going on at a societal level here end up impacting the individual. So the first study is looking at how research with individuals, with women, can end up helping everyone. And the second study is really looking at how larger societal influences come to impact individual level health. Another way of looking at what I do and what these studies touch on is, how do people live and adapt to environments that may seem constrained? And constrained here can be resource poor, situations where a person would seem to have not very many options or alternatives, environments that are maybe more complex than they seem to some people at first glance. And again, this can be both physical and social environments. Both studies are active and currently underway, so I'm just going to give a brief overview here. The first study is the Wisconsin immunological study cohort. We look at how farm mothers impact babies' immune development starting in pregnancy. So we recruit pregnant women. 150 of them are from farm environments, and another 150 are from rural non-farm environments. We follow their babies up to age 8 currently. We hope to follow them for as long as we can. And we ask questions about their physical environment. We collect samples from mom and child, including breast milk, which we know has such a huge impact on the child's immunological development. So much of the child's immune system early in life is built from the mom's immune system that they get from mom's breast milk. We also collect a lot of samples from their environment. We have study staff that go in and vac their floors, and we look at their dust. If they're farm families, we look at the dust in their barn. And we really want to look at all of the microbes and bacteria, both good and bad, that are existing in their environment, because we know those things can help to train the immune system as children get older. And the main things that we're looking at in our children are seasonal allergies, eczema, and asthma. So I think we all know what seasonal allergies are. They're super common. Basically, when we get some pollen, our immune system may sometimes feel like it's something offensive, and they try and fight it like it's a virus. And so we're sneezing and we're coughing and all that lovely stuff. Eczema is a really bad allergic rash on the skin. It it can be very disruptive. It's very, very itchy. Asthma is the most severe of the three. It can be very debilitating and lifelong, obviously causing wheezing and trouble breathing. It's also very expensive to treat, so there's a societal cost there as well. And what we found looking at our farm and our non-farm kids is that the variety of species is really key. Each animal has a sort of different microbiome, is what we call it. And that array of bacteria and viruses, and not all of those are bad, essentially train our immune system on how to operate efficiently. And obviously that results in better health in the future. And some people, look at open fields in our rural environment and farm animals, and that there was that old show from the 90s. I'm dating myself, The Simple Life. But I think this study really uncovers the world of complexity and diversity in our air and our soil, and how our bodies react to it. It's interesting to think and ask this question, one day, can we capture that microbial diversity that farm kids are exposed to and use it to prevent or treat allergy, eczema, and asthma? That would save us all cost when it comes to people's health care. It would save a lot of suffering too. None of those three are particularly fun. No, I don't want to overstate this. We don't know this yet. A lot of work still needs to be done. But that would be a nice outcome of this research. Now, that was an example of a study where we were looking at individuals, and we hope to generate something that will benefit society out of that. That obviously is the goal of all research. But this next study I'm going to talk about looks in the reverse. So it looks at big societal trends and how that ends up impacting individual women's health. And I'll preface here, this is a really complex issue that I'm having to simplify and distill down to only a few minutes. It's a very simplified version of really complex societal trends. So I hope you'll pardon any oversimplification that I may have to make for the sake of time. So our social environment is what we're looking at here. And these larger societal trends, things like our treatment of Native Americans, racism, women's rights, when these are negative or harmful, researchers sometimes refer to them as historical trauma. And this is harm done to a large group of people because of their inclusion in that group. And it tends to affect multiple generations. So I would argue that there's historical trauma in rural areas as well. In my opinion, they've been politically neglected. We can look at how farms have disappeared and been bought out over the decades, the 80s farm crisis, and even more pertinent to those of us that might not be farmers, lack of access to healthcare, good paying jobs in rural areas. We have a lot of issues in rural areas that people in urban areas take for granted. And a lot of that has to do with not always getting the same resources. And in my opinion, that would constitute a form of historical trauma. Now, historical trauma affects health because it limits opportunities available to people in the group that it's affecting. Historical trauma may have kept women from higher education, constrained them to certain types of jobs that maybe tend to be lower paying. And if someone can't earn enough money to support themselves because they're looking for a job, they may lose their house or not have enough food to feed themselves and their family. This is a prime example of the type of constrained environment that I referenced at the beginning. These limited opportunities are really sort of the mediator when historical trauma starts to impact health. And for the particular study that I'm talking about, a lot of those limited opportunities seem to drive people towards substance abuse. Now, this is not to say that women or historically underrepresented groups by any means are the only ones who abuse drugs, quite the opposite. But rather, this is to point out larger factors outside of an individual person's control that can end up impacting the choices available to them, which is important considering the stigma that persists around substance abuse. It's a nice reminder that there are things driving people to this problem that aren't outside of their control, or that are outside of their control, I should say. Now, there were some men in the study, and no disrespect to their very valued participation, but I'm really going to focus on the experiences of the women I spoke to as part of this research, given the focus here on Women's Health Month. I really got to know these women. I talked with them at length for several hours over the course of months to learn about their story and how they were dealing with recovering from substance abuse in their lives. This particular woman, whose story I think really illustrates what I'm trying to show here, we'll call her Susan. That's not her real name. But she grew up in a rural environment. She was a woman. She had significant abuse in her past, particularly at the hands of her now ex-husband, including sexual abuse, severe physical abuse. She couldn't divorce. She didn't have anywhere to live. She didn't have a job. She had those constrained, limited opportunities that I was describing. She was finally able to leave her husband. She just had enough, and she did this because she was finally able to access a battered woman's shelter. And her parents, I believe, helped provide some of the money to get her divorce. Her husband was severely abusive. There was it was particularly acute. Without going into too much detail to protect her anonymity, it was pretty severe. But once out of the marriage, she couldn't live in the shelter anymore. You know, moving takes resources. She could move to a place maybe with better job opportunities, but she didn't have the money for that move, for the down payment for a new place, boxes and tape and gas to drive to someplace else. And so she really kind of, put together a life for herself where she was already at. But she struggled a lot with joblessness and homelessness. And when she did find a job or she did find a home, they were often subpar. They were low-paying jobs that didn't provide enough funds, especially given the medical treatment that she now needed. Her house wasn't safe, given that she had been a victim of abuse. The doors and the locks didn't work, which gave her a high degree of anxiety, made it hard for her to sleep, which of course, then when you're waking up or staying awake all night, you're not performing as well on your job. That affects your mood. It affects all different aspects of your life. And that was really important to her, to have a house where she felt safe. But she didn't feel like she had really a way out of this situation. And this was a real challenge to her substance abuse recovery. She had few opportunities to really resolve the heart of these issues. And so she looked for escapes. And she's not the only one. For a lot of the women I spoke to, they turned to substances to cope with those feelings that ultimately stemmed from these patterns of historical trauma. Now, her kids grew up without her for a good portion of their lives. So that creates limited opportunities for them. That's something I'm sure they'll have to deal with. It hurt her very deeply, and I'm sure it hurt her kids as well. And those limited opportunities persist when there aren't adequate treatment and recovery support options available in a lot of rural communities. But she was resourceful. last I spoke to her, she was remaining in recovery and not going back to alcohol and meth, which were her main drugs of choice. She wasn't afraid to ask for help. She relied on a lot of her social network to barter and trade and sort of get what she needed in the situation, get the help that she required. But obviously, given that this will have an effect on her children too, she was acutely aware of that, and that hurt her deeply. This cycle could very well repeat itself with her own children, which was a huge fear of hers. Now that we understand sort of this link to this historical trauma and how it passes through generations and leads to this issue, how do we use this information to help substance abuse recovery? I think this really points to evidence that changes in larger policies need to occur, how helpful those truly would be. In the case of this one woman, just having that battered woman shelter, and there was a staff member there who was very supportive and really believed in her. That was really what kicked off her recovery. It took that one resource and that one person to really set her on the path that she needed to be on. That isn't to say that she didn't continue to have challenges, but she was doing what she needed to do, and she was working on it, and she was being successful. So again, the title of this presentation was Women's Health is Community Health, and I've attempted to describe research that I've done on how the environment affects women's health through different lenses, looking at the environment as physical or the environment as a social phenomenon, and how women's contribution and participation in research help to improve everyone's health and well-being, as well as how larger societal influences can impact women's health. I really hope you've gotten out of this presentation both the importance and value of participating in research. We can do so much with the time that you so kindly give us, and we're all passionate about making positive impacts to everyone's health based on the contributions of those people who elect to participate. But I hope you also begin to have an appreciation for how resourceful we are as humans and as women in making the most out of our environments, molding our environments to serve our needs, even when it may look to an outsider as though there's not a whole lot there, that it's maybe a simple or not complex environment. And in fact, a lot of complexity and diversity and resourcefulness exists in these environments. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kate, for sharing your time. I think this presentation has been fantastic, and I myself have found it so informative. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
So we will have time for questions later, but if there are any questions, please place those in the comment section, and we will send those over to Kate to be answered as soon as possible. So please drop those in the comment section. Otherwise, Kate, once again, thank you so much.
Thanks, Nathan, and thanks everyone for having me.
All right, have a great day.